My great-grandfather, Frank Robert Harmer, was a marine engineer in the British Merchant Navy, and during the Second World War was constantly at sea. Twice during the war, the ship he was serving on was torpedoed. After the first time, he was granted a fortnight's worth of survivor's leave. As he was serving on ships, when great-grandma Hilda was pregnant, he never got to see the birth of his daughter, Wendy, and first met her when she was 15 months old. After 13 days, he left back to war and did not see her again until she was around the age of 6. Near the end of the war, and the second time he was torpedoed, the survivors were sent to Australia. This is where we begin our story of how far would you travel for love. Because Frank had fallen in love with what he saw in Australia, the question arose, would his dear wife and their 3 young children want to travel and live on the other side of the world? As their ship pulled in, Wendy looked down on the rows and rows of army men and asked my great-grandma, "Which one's my daddy?" after not meeting him since she was an infant. Meanwhile, my grandpa and his family had been happily living in a house which backed onto the Mater Hospital in Newcastle. When the hospital expanded, they bought back the homes and the family needed to find somewhere else to live. So the family moved to Hamilton, another suburb in Newcastle. This proved to be another stepping stone in my family's love story, because the new home was a couple of doors away from the girl who introduced him to the young woman who would become his wife, Wendy, my grandma. They had 3 boys, my 2 uncles, Paul and Murray, and then finally my dad, Jonathan. Across in New Zealand, my mum had just been born. After growing up in New Zealand, my nan and my pop planned a holiday trip around Australia. This was meant to last for 5 years, seeing as much of the country as they could. They ended up liking the first town they visited so much, they stayed there, and are still there to this day. They all got their Australian citizenship in 1990. My mum studied interior design, during which she travelled to Canberra for an architecture conference, where she met the love of her life. Although they lived in different states, Mum and Dad didn't let distance keep them apart. They sent hundreds of letters and would save up for expensive telephone calls. They shared their summer holidays together, living for short periods together in Sydney and then New York. Dad proposed on the top of one of the Twin Towers, and they were married a year later. And now for the highlight of our story. In 1994, Mum and Dad had the most beautiful, happy baby girl. Eventually, I turned out alright, so they decided to have another baby. My sister was very sick when she was born. She ended up being part of an RPA documentary.
Baby Jordan is just minutes old. She was delivered by caesarean section after doctors discovered something wrong.
This baby's got a condition known as gastroschisis, which means that there's a hole in the abdominal wall and the bowel is all hanging out. What we've got to do now in order for the baby to survive is put the bowel back and try to close the abdominal wall over the top.
3 days after Jordan was born, Mum Kerry arrives at the new Children's Hospital for a very special meeting.
Jordan?
This song still makes my mum cry. It was the song from the opening credits of the show.
Why you look so sad? The tears are in your eyes. Come on and come to me now. You don't be ashamed to cry. Let me see you through, 'cause I've seen the dark side too.
Finally, she was allowed to leave hospital and has been healthy ever since.
You don't know what to do, nothing you confess.
Love has taken my family across oceans, over continents, and around the world. Where will love take us next?
I'll stand by you. Won't let nobody hurt you. I'll stand by you. So,
Bye-bye.
Oh, bye-bye.
Good girl.
Bye-bye.